So I'd like to welcome everybody who wants to get in the call. We'll get started right now with news you can use. Today's information goes back to an old business practice that we used to use a long time ago that has recently resurfaced and frankly kind of resurfaced in a bad way. It's also the top of the news cycle for housing news yesterday. And it deals with what we call zombie debt. Zombie debt are loans on properties that people, for whatever reason, have either forgotten about, nobody has serviced, somebody's cheese slid off their cracker on these deals. There's something happened. So there are literally thousands of these now that are being foreclosed on. Let me go back and explain kind of what a zombie debt is in more detail, and specifically what has happened in the last 30 days regarding foreclosures on zombie debt. So for those of you who remember back to the Great Recession back in 2007, 8, 9, and then further on down to 12, when housing prices hit the bottom, there were a lot of properties foreclosed upon. There was quite a number of properties foreclosed upon, but there were a lot of properties that they ended up allowing over a period of time the current mortgagee, the current borrower, to make these payments on these first. And mortgages, we were just talking, a couple of friends and I were talking the other day about the concept that back 15 years ago, every loan when you bought a house contained a first and a second, and typically by the same. So you'd see a Wells Fargo first for 80%, and you see a Wells Fargo second for 15%, and then the borrower themselves put in 5% on the deal plus the closing costs. And that was pretty standard. Today it's single mortgage at 80%, and that's kind of it. The rest you got to put up in cash, but didn't used to have to do that 15, 20 years ago. And so there was a lot of mortgages around and a lot of houses around during the start of the Great Recession that had two mortgages on them. And frankly, a lot of those first, as we know, got foreclosed upon, but a lot of the firsts either forbearance, used the forbearance program, put the money at the back of a loan, different things. The bottom line is a lot of these people who made it through that period of time stayed in their home, even though they fell behind and caught up on their first mortgage. A lot of these second mortgage lenders totally disappeared. So they may have had a large second mortgage, but they stopped collecting. They just assumed everything was gone, was unwritten. And in some cases, these lenders filed bankruptcy. And as a part of their bankruptcy estate, these loans that they held on their books, even though they thought they were worthless, they were able to sell some at auctions and things like that to generate money for the bankruptcy estate. So one in particular had tens of thousands of these seconds, and they sold them for like 2, 3, 4 cents on the dollar. So $100,000 mortgage, could be bought for $1,000, some cases 500, because they just assumed that, the house was lost. They'd have to go after the borrower. And, there is some money to be made if you go after a borrower in those kinds of cases. You can't on the initial purchase money, but you can on a second. And we'll talk about that on a future piece of information I've got coming up. But the bottom line is a lot of these people caught up their first and have been making payments on their first for 15, 16, 17 years, paying them on time, some cases paying off their first, only to find out that their house is going to be foreclosed on because somebody bought that $100,000 mortgage for $1,000 and has let the interest clock tick. And that $100,000 mortgage now might be $140,000, $170,000, $180,000 with penalties and fees. And here's this house that was worth $300,000 and is now worth $550,000 and is paid off as far as the owner thinks. But what they didn't know is the second in the background was churning along. So now the guys who went out and bought this zombie debt, bought these mortgages that everybody thought were no good in the second, third, or fourth position, are foreclosing on these properties because these properties have equity in them. Specifically, the minute somebody gets below 10% on their first, they're automatically triggering foreclosure notices. And they have a right to because they haven't been paid in years. And in that particular case of the one I described, it started off as $100,000, I think it's $182,000 now. They put a demand in for the entire amount. They paid $1,000 for that. That was it. And they're foreclosing for $180,000, and they will get it. The house will sell for, even a $550 house at auction will sell for $450 if it's in good to fair shape, and even in poor shape, it'll sell for $200,000, $300,000. It's going to cover the $180,000 second, no matter what. And the seller who has, dug in, paid their bills, but somehow has conveniently forgot they had a second at one time and just assumed by the grace of God it had been wiped away when it was actually running in the background. Nobody's collecting anything on it. So they have some huge opportunities here to make some money. A lot of those old borrowers are going to kind of get screwed on this deal, although, who knows? I mean, everyone for this article that they interviewed in the AP Wire that came out yesterday regarding this issue, every single one of them claimed they didn't remember they had a second, or they, forgot about it. They thought it had been taken, there was an excuse. Nobody was like, yeah, I knew I hadn't paid it in 15, 17 years. And I've been pocketing the money and going to the gaming casino. So there was, everybody was absolutely truthful in the article, not. But anyway, this zombie debt's going to be a big thing. There's billions, tens of billions of dollars involved in zombie debt. And since everybody's got equity in it and the debt has been paid down on all those houses, there is a lot of money to fight over. So there's going to be some court cases coming up. We'll see what we do. Now, as a business principle, as a business philosophy, buying a second or a third mortgage in the middle of a default process is not a bad way to go. And I've done it a number of times. I bought $100,000 mortgages for, I think $2,000 was as low as I got. I bought a lot of $50,000 mortgages for $5,000, which was too much. And, if you follow the foreclosure process, maybe for those of you who attended our equity buyout clinics last year, our 5-week program that we had, we described how you can monetize that situation. But that's a fair way to go. But you're buying the debt and then you're foreclosing on it if you're not getting paid, which is only fair. So, and the 3 times out of 10 that you end up successful pays for the 7 that you lose times 15 or 20x. So it's a good business philosophy. There's guys that focus on it. Nobody's gone to this depth to really monetize zombie debt, but it looks like it's going to be a successful philosophy. So we'll keep you guys in the know. As always, stay safe out there in this business. There's more things that you don't know than what you do know, and what you don't know can get you into trouble if you're not careful. So if you don't know, ask. And if you think you know, ask. And even if you're positive, ask again. So I do the same thing. I talk to my experts, and I'll pass that knowledge down to you guys as well. All right, that's it for news you can use for today.